Dear students, today we shall be discussing one of the important topics in limnology, that is lakes, their origin and diversity. And today we shall be mainly focusing on the types of the lakes based on their origin and the uses of lakes. But before proceeding, it is my request to you all to like and subscribe my channel BioLearning. First of all, we shall be knowing that what lake means and what is the definition of a lake. Lake is actually derived from an English word which means water body or waterway. And Forel in 1892, he defined a lake as a body of standing water, occupying a basin lacking continuity with sea. Now there are two actual words on which it has been emphasized. The one, that is, it is a standing water body, and second, it is lacking continuity with sea. And in this way, the Forel eliminated all those very lakes which were having continuity with the sea, that is, they were getting water from the sea. Now, the second important modification was taken or was carried out by Thienemann 1926 and Lenz 1928. And based on their definition, lake is sometimes defined as a body of standing water. Now here, standing water is intact, isolated from sea, having an area of open, relatively deep water, sufficiently large to produce somewhere in periphery a wave-swept shore. Now students, this definition is very interesting. Herein, the lake is being defined as a body of standing water, point number one. Point number two, completely isolated from sea. Thirdly, having an area of relatively open, deep water, sufficiently large enough to produce somewhere in periphery a wave-swept shore. It should be capable of producing a wave-swept shore. It should be deep enough. It should be a standing water body. It should be completely isolated from the sea. Now, many a times we are not able to mark the difference between the lake and the pond, and therefore the Carpenter 1928, he tried to mark the difference between the true lake and a pond, which is depth. The depth is actually the difference between the lake and a pond, and it is not the area. And accordingly, a pond is quite body of the water where floating vegetation extends to the middle. That is, it extends to the middle of the basin, in which biota is similar to the littoral zone of the lake. Now, for example, if this is a water body and this is another water body, and this is the littoral zone wherein vegetation is present, and here littoral zone where vegetation is present, but the difference between the lake and the pond is that this vegetation extends up to the middle, that is middle of the basin, and herein the biota is similar to that of the littoral zone. But here in the case of the lake, the biota is not similar to that of the littoral zone, and the littoral zone is, there is restriction of the vegetation in the littoral zone. So accordingly, pond is a quite water body where floating vegetation extends to the middle basin, in which biota is very similar to that of the littoral zone of the lake. And I was talking about the Forel 1892. We have discussed Forel as one of the pioneers in the field of the limnology who has done a great work and who were the founders of the subject of the limnology, and that we have discussed in the lecture, that is limnology and its history, that you can click onto the I button above, just above, and you can watch that very video as well. Now when we look at the lake in a simple language, if I try to make you understand, that lake is stored water on the surface of the earth whose boundaries are limited and are not connected to sea or ocean, and lakes are called closed bodies of water, and unlike oceans, which are open bodies of the water. And secondly, the lakes and ponds are sometimes considered as same, but actually they are different. Lakes are larger than ponds and they are deep enough to stratify. Now, how lakes are formed or how lakes originate? There are basically 6 ways which have been given by the Welch in his book, that there are basically 6 ways. Though there are different kinds of the lakes which originate, but the basic points are these very 6. The first important point is that by the glacial action, that lakes can originate by the glacial action, that is by digging out the basins or by deposition of moraines and debris so as to form a closed basin. Many times these very debris, they clog, they stop the course of the water, and they can form a closed basin, and thus the lakes can originate. Or by actual ice obstruction, many times by actual ice obstruction of the lower end, that may also lead to the formation of the lake, that we shall be dealing one by one in next few minutes. So by melting, it is by melting of huge masses of the ice in glacial debris. So the first important point is by glacial action. Secondly, by landslides which obstruct the valleys, and thus they give rise to the accumulation of the water in that very valley, and the lakes can arise, lakes can originate. Thirdly, solution of underlying lake with subsequent sinking of the surface. For example, limestone sinks. For example, when during the course of the flowing of the water, the limestone or lime rock comes in contact, and in the due course of the time that melts away, or that becomes a solution, and that very gap of the rock is filled by the water, and then it can give rise to the lake. Then crustal movement of the earth, we can also call it as a tectonic movement of the earth. That is by just having a gap in between the two plates of the earth, the lakes can be formed, huge lakes can be formed. Or the craters are of the extinct volcanoes. Many times when the volcanoes erupt and later on when they subside and they become extinct, the volcanoes are no longer active, and it is the crater formed by the eruption, and the water gets accumulated in that very crater, and that very crater can become a lake. Then lastly, it is the various activities of the rivers. For example, change of the channel producing oxbow lake, or obstruction of the mouth of the tributaries can also give rise to lakes. We shall be discussing the types of the lakes based on the origin. In 1957, Hutchinson published a monograph titled A Treatise on Limnology, which is regarded as a benchmark discussion on the classification of all major lake types, their origin, morphometric characteristics, and distribution. His classification based on origin recognizes 11 major types of the lakes that are further subdivided into 76 subtypes. But today we shall be discussing only 11 types, major types of the lakes which were put forth by the Hutchinson in 1957. And those very lakes are tectonic lakes, volcanic lakes, glacial lakes, fluvial lakes, solution lakes, landslide lakes, Aeolian lakes, shoreline lakes, organic lakes, anthropogenic lakes, and meteorite or uh, extraterrestrial impact lakes. Now we shall be discussing all these 11 one by one. First of all, we shall be discussing tectonic lakes. Lakes formed by large-scale crustal movements separating water bodies from the sea. They are called as the tectonic lakes. For example, Lake Aral and Caspian seas, they are formed in the rift valleys by earth faulting, folding, or tilting. So by the fault in the earth, or by fold in the plates of the earth, or by tilting, these very lakes were formed, and most of the important ones are the Aral Lake and the Caspian Sea. Such as we do have some other examples such as African rift lakes and the Lake Baikal in Russia. They are also tectonic lakes. And lakes in this category, they may be exceptionally old. For example, the present day Lake Baikal, it originated 25 million years ago. And this is the picture showing the Lake Baikal, Russia. It is also, you should keep in mind that one of the deepest uh, lakes on earth, it is the Lake Baikal, which is in Russia. Secondly, based on the origin, the type is volcanic lake, or we also call it as a crater lake or caldera lakes. So during volcanic explosion, the top of the cone may be blown off, leaving behind a natural hollow called as crater. For example, in this very picture, you are seeing a hollow of this very mountain, of this very hill, which was actually a active volcano some thousands of years ago. Once upon a time, it was a active volcano, and it became extinct, and now it is a crater lake. And we also call them as the caldera. This may be enlarged by subsidence into a caldera, and in dormant or extinct volcanoes, rain falls straight into the crater, and this we call it as the caldera. We also call it as the caldera. So by accumulation of the rain in this very caldera, which has no superficial outlet, and thus forms a crater lake or caldera lake or volcanic lake. So they are near circular. Or sometimes they may be elliptical in outline. And we do have one of the important lakes, that is the Crater Lake in Oregon, USA. Type of the lake, we call them as the glacial lakes. The advance and retreat of the glaciers can scrape depressions in the surface where water accumulates. Such lakes are common in Scandinavia, Patagonia, Siberia, and Canada. And these very lakes are formed by ice eroding, by erosion of the ice. So when the ice sheets, they erode, the hollows on the surface are formed, and such lakes of the glacial origin are abundant in Finland. And it is said that there are about 35,000 glacial lakes. So Finland, we do have the example of the Finland, and it is known that there are about 35,000 lakes, glacial lakes, found in Finland alone. And glacial lakes are numerous lakes in the world, and most lakes are found in northern Europe, Northern America and have been either influenced or created by the latest but not the last glaciation. And we do have the examples as the proglacial lakes, subglacial lakes, finger lakes, and epishelf lakes. And secondly, when we talk about these very epishelf lakes, they are highly stratified lakes. It is the photo of the Great Lakes seen from the space. These very Great Lakes are the largest glacial lakes in the world. Fourth type of the lake based on the origin are fluvial lakes. Fluvial or riverine lakes are lakes produced by running water. These lakes include plunge pool lakes, fluviatile dams, and meander lakes. Now, one of the important lakes which is formed by the fluvial kind, that is Oxbow Lake. And the most common type of the fluvial lake is a crescent-shaped lake called an Oxbow Lake. Due to the distinctive curved shape, they can form in river valleys and result as a result of meandering. So these very Oxbow Lake, they are formed because of the meandering of the course of the river that we shall be discussing just after a few moments. Then we do have the fluviatile dams, and these kind of the lakes or the dams are formed where the sediment from the tributary blocks the main river. When the sediments from a tributary block the main river, they form the fluviatile dams, and when the sediments from the main river they block a tributary, they form the lateral lakes. So the difference between is the which blocks other. So if the tributary blocks the main river, it is fluviatile lake. If the sediments from the main river they block a tributary, then they are called as the lateral lakes. Then in this very picture, what you are seeing in this picture, it is an Oxbow Lake, and it is a picture of Nowitna River, Alaska. Herein what you are seeing, that this is the river which is flowing in a manner which I am showing you, that this is the course of the action of the river. So this very picture of the Nowitna River in Alaska shows almost two Oxbow lakes clearly. One is just I'm showing you with the help of the green, that is this at the bottom. This is one Oxbow Lake, and other is on this very side, that is in the middle. Now, how these very lakes must have been formed? That these very lakes are formed when the river changes its course of the action, and leading to the formation of the lake by its meandering, by changing the course as a result of meandering. So these very lakes, we call them as the Oxbow lakes. The fifth kind of the lake based on origin is solution lake. As the name indicates, the solution. And solution lake is lake occupying a basin formed by the surface dissolution of bedrock. So in areas underlain by the soluble bedrock, it is solution by precipitation and percolating water commonly producing the cavities. So it is the cavities which are produced by the rocks which are liable to be form a solution. For example, the limestone is one of the best example which dissolves and forming, or which collapses, forming the large sinkholes, so that the water gets accumulated in it, thus forming the lakes. So many times where the groundwater lies near the ground surface, a sinkhole will be filled with water as a solution lake. And if such lake consists of a large area of standing water that occupies an extensive closed depression in the limestone, and it is called as the karst lake. It is called as the karst lake. It is called as the karst lake many a times. So they are normally called karst lakes and are very common in the appropriate geological terrain where such kinds of the rocks or the stones are formed, are present. They tend to be considered as small, although there is some evidence that some large water bodies may have originated in this way. For example, on this very side, we have the picture of the lake Ohrid, Yugoslavia, which is also formed by the dissolution of the such kinds of the minerals or such kind of the rocks. So we do have the examples of the limestone caves, often contain pools of the standing water, which are known as the underground lakes. And the classical example of the solution lakes are abundant in the karst regions at Dalmatian coast of Croatia and within the large parts of the Florida. We call them as the karst geography or karst area. So those very rocks which form the solution, we call them as the solution lakes, and it is mainly formed by the dissolution of the soluble rock. And mostly, for example, if we take an example of the CaCO3 plus in presence of carbon dioxide and water, calcium carbonate in presence of carbon dioxide and the water, they give rise to the calcium and bicarbonate, thus forming the calcium and bicarbonate, and thus gets dissolved and forming the solution lakes. So many times they form the sinkholes, they mainly a time they form the cave ponds, they many times they form the mounds. So thus forming these very kinds of the lakes, we call them as solution lakes. Sixth type, we do have the landslide lakes. And this very landslide lake is created by the blockage of the river valley by either mud flows, rock slides, or screes. For example, in this very picture, what you are seeing, that there was a huge landslide. In this very picture, what you are seeing, that in this very area, in the Habgen Lake in 1959, in the Habgen 1959, there was a huge landslide, and that resulted in the sinking of a part of the area, and thus forming a lake in 1959. We call it as the Habgen lake. Uh, and it was all because of the landslide which took place in 1959 because of the earthquake. So next we do have the Aeolian lakes. Aeolian, many times it is pronounced as Aeolian or Aeolian lakes. Now you have to keep in mind simply the lakes which are formed by the wind activity in arid regions, which may erode with the broken rocks or redistribute sand, which are generally temporary. For example, there was an area which was having the huge amount of the sand in it, and later on, due to the wind activity, this very sand that that was flown away, and that led to the depression, and this very depression later on accumulated the water, thus forming the lake. We call such kinds of the lakes as the Aeolian lakes. And we do have one of the examples of such a kind of lake. We do have the Moses Lake in Washington, which was originally a shallow natural lake, and an example of the lake basin dammed by the wind-blown sand. So it was accumulating the sand, and later on, when the sand blew away, it formed a natural lake. The eighth kind of the lake, we have the shoreline lakes. These are generally the lakes created by the blockage of the estuaries or by the uneven accretion of beach ridges by longshore or other currents. For example, once upon a time, you are seeing here that, for example, this is the sea, or this is the some another water body, but it is now totally barricaded by impoundment, and this led to the formation of the lake side by side of the shore. We call such lakes as the shoreline lakes, and they are mostly created by irregularities or inundation along the coastline of the large lakes. It can be a lake which is usually a result of the long shore currents, and lakes cut off from the sea by the creation of splits caused by the sediment accretion due to longshore sediment movement, or called as the shore lakes. And such of the shore lakes we find along the coastal lakes of the Egypt. They are the best examples of the shoreline lakes. So when along the shores, because of the irregularities or inundation, the coastline is cut off, and it leads to the formation, or it is split and leads to the formation of another water body, stagnant water body. We call such a water body as the lake, as the shoreline lake. Then we do have the organic lakes. The organic lakes are the lakes which are created by the actions of the plants and animals. So as the name indicates, the organic lake, which is created by the action of plant and animals, and on the whole they are relatively rare in occurrence, and they are typically ephemeral. Ephemeral means they are not so long lived, but they are short lived, and the features are relatively similar to that of the other types of the lakes. The basins in such organic lakes are associated with the beaver dams, coral lakes, or dams formed by the vegetation. And many a times we do have the peat lakes, and peat lakes they are the form of the organic lakes. They form where a buildup of partly decomposed plant material in a wet environment leaves the vegetated surface below the water. So this very how they are formed, these very peat lakes, that is all because of the activity of the plants, you can say vegetation, and they form where a buildup of, so first of all decomposition takes place of the plant material in a wet environment, and this very environment leaves the vegetated surface below the water table for a sustained period of time, and they are often low in nutrients and mildly they are acidic, and with the bottom waters low in dissolved oxygen. So such kind of lakes, they are often low in nutrients, they are mildly acidic, and the having the low dissolved oxygen. So what this very picture, these are the organic lake in the polar region. We do have the example. So such lakes have the certain features. I will repeat those very features again. That is, they are low nutrient, that is low nutrients. Then we do have the mildly acidic, then low dissolved oxygen. So such lakes, they are organic lakes because they are formed by the activity of the actions of the plants, animals. Now why animals? Because bacteria are one of the important organisms which help in the decomposition. So that is why we say that they are formed by the action of the plants as well as the animals. So anthropogenic lakes, the 10th, the second last type, that is the anthropogenic, are the reservoir lakes. As the name indicates, anthropogenic, that is the man-made lakes. We also call them as the artificial lake. We also call them as the reservoir lakes. So these are man-made lakes formed by the construction of the dams across the streams, such as Tungabhadra Reservoir in South India. We do have the Bhakra Nangal Reservoir in the northwestern part of the India. So this is the photograph of the Bhakra Nangal Dam, which is called as the reservoir lake, and it is also called as the artificial lake or anthropogenic lake. Then lastly, the type based on the origin is meteorite or extraterrestrial impact lakes. So as the name indicates, the lakes which are formed by the hitting of the meteorite and thus forming a crater-like lake, we call them as the meteorite or extraterrestrial impact lakes. So meteorite lakes are also known as the crater lakes, and we should not confuse them with that of the volcanic or that very crater lake. They are created by the catastrophic impact with the earth by extraterrestrial objects such as meteorites or asteroids. We do have the one example such as Lonar Lake in India, or Lake Algigi-Tigin in northeast Siberia, and Pingualvit Crater Lake in Quebec, Canada. So these are the examples of the meteorite lakes, and this is the huge dent. This is the huge dent formed by a meteorite impact 50,000 years ago in the Lonar, India. This very lake is the Lonar Lake, which is present in India. Then lastly, we shall be discussing in this very lecture, we shall be discussing the uses of the lakes. The lakes are traditionally undervalued resources to human society, and today lakes have the diverse uses and utilities. They provide a multitude of the uses and are the prime regions of the human settlement and habitation. So they are the prime regions of the human settlement and habitation. And uses include drinking, municipal water supply, industrial and cooling of the water supply, power generation, navigation, commercial and recreational fisheries, body contact recreation, boating, and other aesthetic recreational uses. So lakes are of a great use to us. And in addition, not only these are the uses of the lakes, but beside these, lakes are also used for irrigation, agricultural irrigation, canalization, and the waste disposal as well. And it has been commonly believed that the large lakes have an infinite ability to absorb or dilute industrial or municipal waste, and it is largely as a result of human waste disposal practices that monitoring and assessment are providing to be necessary in many large lakes. And the vegetation, this very vegetation in the brackish water lakes in Indian Sundarbans is noted for its bioaccumulation capacity for the heavy metals. So one way or other, they are also known to be as the bioaccumulators of the heavy metals, which are detrimental to the human health, and they absorb such kind of the heavy metals.